Good evening. I'm here with Scott Smigiel, and he is performing at Wonder Valley Experimental 13 as Scott Smigiel. So, hello, Scott.
Hi, Mark. Thanks
Um,
for having me.
Thanks for being here. What started you down the path to perform electronic music?
Well, I guess it's probably the same way most people get into music is, they hear their favorite, they hear their favorite bands and they're like, I want to do that. So that's more or less what it was. I was like, late high school, early college. I was really getting into like different electronic bands. It started out with bands like Depeche Mode and New Order, and then it just sort of
Cool.
evolved or devolved as if you want into more industrial stuff. Nine Inch Nails, Skinny Puppy, Front 242, and just kind of more or less just sort of looking at the singles and seeing, oh, I like this remix, who remixed this, and then go and find out that band and that band and that band. So that's sort of how I found new artists and things, and then saved up my pennies and my dollars and wound up buying a Yamaha synthesizer. It wasn't really a synthesizer, it's just the one with had a whole bunch of, it was more or less a Rompler. It just had a bunch of samples that you could layer on top of each other and stuff. But yeah, I more or less just really got into experimenting with that. I sort of had the mindset that I'm never going to use a preset. I'm just going to continually make my own sounds. And I had that. Actually, I still have that one. And then like 10 years later after that, I bought another bigger Yamaha. And then about 10, 15 years after that, I just bought another one, and then another one, and another one, another one. It kind of snowballed after that. I kind of really started getting into like the analog stuff, because you turn a knob and it's just like, oh, what's this do? What's this do? That's just sort of how I kind of.
Well, if you were a fan of Yamaha stuff, did you ever go down the DX7 rabbit hole and go into FM synthesis at all?
Not yet. I kind of came after the DX. I kind of got into it after the DX7, and I really never, at the time even, I never really clued into like the whole what the DX7 was. Korg just earlier this year, or late last year, released their sort of small FM synthesizer, the Op6. That's kind of on my wish list to get. Most of my stuff is, I don't want to say cheap, because it's not, and it's not really even it's inexpensive for synthesizers, but they're not inexpensive. But I kind of I try to go for the smaller, because I just have, it's kind of a big work table, but you try and go for something that's a foot and a half wide, as something that's 4 or 5 feet wide now. So it's
right.
It's not like I just more density than, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah,
cool.
that's more or less how I got into it. And
well, what is your process for putting tracks together?
I guess it more or less starts out messing around with a single instrument. Sometimes I kind of have something in mind, a starting point in mind. Other times I'm just, twiddling knobs and patching cables. Basically, my setup is I have a Eurorack, a couple Eurorack bays. I started really getting into that, and I had a really big wish list. And then as time went on, that wish list sort of pared down, and I'm really not so as jazzed about Eurorack. I like the potential of it, but I just think there's just too much out there, and something. But anyway, it's not good or bad. It just is, kind of thing. So my goal is to hopefully be able to fill in all the holes in my rack and be done with it. But anyway, I usually start out with the Eurorack, just because it lends itself to noodling very well. So you just kind of experiment, and then I find a sound or something, and then I usually set that aside and go to another synthesizer and try and keep the first sound in my head without actually listening to it, and try and come up with something that will fit that, and then I put the two together. Then usually after I get maybe 2 or 3 sounds, I'll start thinking of how I want these sounds to play with each other, and at that point I'll probably start using a sequencer to trigger them at some point, especially if they're more like shorter percussive type sounds as opposed to like long drones. If it's going to be like a long drone, I'll just leave the VCA wide open and let that go. But for like shorter percussive sounds, I'll find if not with the sequencer, then just use like an LFO as a clock or something, just so to keep it happening. And then I'll just use the rest of the hardware. I have like 3 or 4 little keyboards and a few semi-modular modulars, and then I have the Eurorack. And then basically I'll just build the song from the hardware, and then once I get something that, and then once I get all the sounds together and things happening, I'll just leave it on for days at a time, and I'll come back like the next day, put the headphones on. I'm like, yeah, okay, this is still good, and then maybe tweak a few things here and there, and then let it sit for a day, and then usually after a couple days, I'll actually try and put it into some sort of format, progression where it's actually sort of a song or a track. No one's really singing, so it can't really be. But I'll try and rearrange the pieces so it actually, maybe has some sort of narrative, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Give it a form.
Yeah, and then at that point, I'll record it into the computer. And each track will be its own track in the DAW, and then at that point, I'll usually use effects plugins and software synthesizers to more or less accentuate or highlight different parts of what I did with the hardware. I don't usually add new part. It's rare that I'll add a new part with the soft synths. They're just there more to kind of layer in different elements of sounds and things.
Okay.
And then at that point, and also kind of during this phase, I'll worry about, fading things in and out and panning things and, sort of that phase. And then at that phase, once I'm done with that, I got to more or less mentally tell myself, okay, this is done. I'm not going to mess with it anymore. And then after that, I go into like the more, I guess, mixing,
right,
mastering kind of phase. But yeah, once I get done with that, the soft synth and the effects phase, all right, this is pretty much done. I'm not going to add any more of this. Occasionally I'll take stuff away in mixing when I'm mixing it, because it's like, yeah, this sounds better without it, so I'm just not going to have it in there. But
sure.
And then from there I go on to mixing and air quotes mastering, because I'm not really a mastering engineer. I just watched a couple of YouTube videos on how to make your stuff sound better after you mix it.
Well, there you go. I think that's how most people address everything. It's even how I do plumbing.
Yeah, exactly. Great.
So, tell us a little bit about your new release on Bandcamp.
Okay, yeah, I released, it's called Algorithms of Bliss. I don't really write songs about things, so a lot of my titles I just pull off of, I just think are cool things that I've heard, or turns of phrase, or something I've read that's usually like, the last half of a sentence and the first half of a sentence or something. But yeah, it's usually, but so yeah, it's an EP. It's called Algorithms of Bliss. I recorded it here, and it's just, I don't know, kind of drony. I sold my drum machine before I made this, so there's like no drums on it at all. So it's a lot more drony than some of the stuff I've done in the past. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
All right. Algorithms of Bliss. We'll look for that. This pretty much ends the interview. Thank you very much, Scott.
Thank you, Mark.